This is the Hemophilia Council of California's webinar, Virtually Making Your Voice Heard, and I am Lynn Kintz, the Executive Director of the Hemophilia Council of California. And we want to thank you so much for joining us today. This is the first time which we have had to do our advocacy days as a virtual event. This is new to all of us, but it's more important than ever that we work on making our voices heard and work to fight for access to treatment and access to insurance and important things to be able to continue to treat bleeding disorders and other rare and chronic conditions in the state of California. So we thank you guys for joining us today. We are pleased to have a presentation. Caitlin Perry from Perry Communications is joining us, and she's going to share with us about social media and how we can use virtual advocacy to make our voice heard and to amplify our advocacy efforts. So Caitlin?
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn, and good morning, everybody. Just as a brief background, my firm has really helped dozens of organizations and tens of thousands of advocates over the years communicate their stories through digital channels. It's always been a really effective way to amplify other messages, other tools. But clearly, the pandemic has really thrust this work into the spotlight. Now more than ever, it's really important we humanize digital connections. Typically, once you're kind of in person and in front of a legislator, it's easy for them to see how issues impact you. When we're communicating virtually, it's easily can feel disconnected. It can risk becoming too abstract, too big. So to echo what Kimberly said earlier, it's really imperative that you share your personal stories, that your experiences really can change minds, really can educate in ways that others truly can't. So as we look ahead to social media, it's always going to be there. If anything, over the years, we've seen it grow from, MySpace in the early 2000s to Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat now, with millions upon millions of users. It's truly changed the face of advocacy. It allows policymakers to learn quickly what constituents want or don't want, and makes them pretty accessible to the public in ways that we've never really been able to before, to really cut through either through phones, email, and now we have, again, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. I know some legislators are on Snapchat. We're not going to get into that today. But again, there's just so many channels. So figuring out that we're not going to get away from it. And so I feel, especially maybe in the past 5 years and now, there are so many organizations and others, okay, we need social media, so how best can we use it? And specifically for advocates, knowing that 100% of our state legislature, as well as federal electeds, they're all on social media. And I know Twitter especially, we've heard from dozens of electeds that one of the first things they do when they walk in the door is ask one of their legies, what are their Twitter mentions? What are people saying? What are they upset about? So we know that it's one of those avenues that really cuts through. So how do we use that to our advantage? How do we use that to impact public policy, amplify our messaging? And it's truly one of the ways, again, social media, that the more people come together and coalesce around an issue, the greater the opportunity we have to make a difference. It's easy to silence one voice. It's much harder to silence millions, as we've seen in the protests over the past couple of weeks. So to make our asks as directive, effective, and impactful as it was to talk to electeds in person, we need to mobilize that groundswell of support and voices that cut through online noise and make it impossible for them to shut off. So particularly during COVID, we can use this and we can use social media to illustrate challenges and provide solutions to their public policy challenges, to issues you guys are experiencing that they might not otherwise realize what their constituents need. And I know even just during March, Facebook and Instagram themselves saw 70% increase in usage. And knowing that those were already quite big platforms, knowing that 70% more usage that people are just online and they're ready to accept information now more than ever. So let's give them something to educate themselves on. And so through social media, again, we're amplifying our existing messages. We're not only just sharing our personal story, we're sharing it in a way that others can reflect, can realize, can see their own experiences in yours. So we can use this to connect with other advocates. We can help raise awareness around specific issues like California budget issues that the general public would not know about unless we have advocates like you guys making noise about it, making electeds aware of it, who then can help make media aware of it. And then the general public can have a better idea of how specific policies, no matter how good they sound, can really be detrimental to someone who has hemophilia, who has a bleeding disorder. So we can coalesce support not just within our own community, our own bleeding disorders community, but through friends, through loved ones, through their networks. It just takes that one kind of relational, we call it a relational organizing. It takes one person to then share with their network, who maybe one person in that realized and saw something, share with theirs. We go from one view to hundreds of thousands within seconds. There's nothing that can beat your guys' personal stories. You're on the front lines. You're able to share how these specific decisions impact you and your loved ones. And as advocates, you can help provide background and context as to why certain legislation is needed or why it's harmful in ways that other people might not understand. And so today we'll talk briefly about Twitter, Facebook, and a little bit about Instagram. I like to focus mainly on Twitter, especially for advocacy. It's one of the best avenues to really just get in front of an elected, be succinct, make a compelling point, but that in itself is a little difficult. And it is important to note that while all channels have their specific benefits, Twitter is highly political, very active, very timely. Facebook, long form, you have a better opportunity to explain your issue in depth and tie it into timely current events without being constrained to 280 characters. And Instagram, obviously, it's very creative, helpful for ongoing campaigns and causes, but you really have to stick to your branding. And so knowing the differences between these is really important. It used to be that just kind of put out your message and just spam it out on all of your channels. But the more that each of these have kind of found their own little niches, it's important that we comply with that and kind of tweak our messaging for the different channels. And the reason I bring this up and kind of point it out is that it's no longer beneficial to just spam these channels without the time necessary to understand the differences between. So if you don't have the capacity to create specific content for these channels, I highly recommend, if you're going to be an advocate, if you want to help impact public policy and coalesce your own community, that Twitter really is your best bet. And spending your time on this one channel, since you have so many other things going on in your guys' lives, that this is the most effective way without it becoming this behemoth that you then don't ever actually use because it's too big, there's too many channels, and you have too much going on in your day. So again, I mentioned all of that, knowing that it's super important to advocate through social media, through Twitter, but knowing the different channels and knowing where you might be the most effective will help in the long run, not only your own cause, your own brand, but especially the larger bleeding disorders community, the larger health advocacy, patient advocate community. And so Twitter, again, it's easy to introduce yourself. You can tag lawmakers very easily. There's a link that I believe Lynn shared in the social media toolkit that helps you find your specific either House representative or senator, their website with all of their information. Now, the quick little point that again was in Lynn's toolkit was regarding tagging lawmakers. I always like to do it in a conversational of, hey, at Kevin McCarty, this issue is going on. If you start off with Kevin McCarty in the beginning, then you'll need to add in the period to make sure that it actually is sent out on or it's tweeted out to the public rather than kind of a mention just to Kevin McCarty. Another thing with Twitter, being very succinct with a simple call to action, keeping it, I like to say, although they expanded to 280 characters, that by no means means you need to use all 280 characters. If you realize you can't quite get what you want to say within that tweet, I recommend going over to Facebook and doing it that way. But Twitter, it's a really good challenge to kind of, again, take your elevator speech that is already pretty short, but really condense it even more to make it pack a punch. So you don't have to be conversational. You don't have to worry about like conjuncting words or making them shorter. It's really just about the message of what you're trying to say. And there are little benefits, either if you want to do threads to make it a bit more long form. You can reach out to me if you have any questions before I keep getting into the weeds on Twitter. But hashtags, obviously very important for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, aside from Snapchat and TikTok. But they really are what coalesce and helps others outside of your own network see what's going on. So using hashtags in a deliberative way, either if you're gonna tweet tomorrow during your meetings, using the hashtag HCC Legislative Day, so others who are also advocating tomorrow can quickly either retweet, boost, help share what you tweeted, help see what others are going on, so you can kind of keep track of what's going on with that hashtag, as well as just the general larger community with hemophilia and bleeding disorders. It's just important to note successful advocacy doesn't happen in a vacuum, and the way we can get out of that vacuum is using hashtags in a meaningful way, not just hashtagging everything, because that's really not the point. They're supposed to be targeted. They're supposed to be helpful. So it's knowing that others are using this hashtag and helping amplify that in a meaningful way. So like I mentioned before, Facebook is super helpful for long form with ongoing dialogue with lawmakers. You can introduce yourself more fully. You can have some background on your specific issue, your story, addressing the issue in depth, much more than Twitter, again, allows you to. And I believe it's about 10 years ago, it still feels like last year to me, that Facebook brought in hashtags. It's not as easy, and they're not as, I would say, targeted, needed, necessary as they are on Twitter. I think it's Facebook's way of trying to do the same thing. They're still helpful. They still do the same thing. They're just not quite as impactful as they are on Twitter. And the one thing I would say also with Facebook, because you have more room to explain your issue and tie them into current events, the more likely it is that others within your network can feel a bit of a connection, even if they're not impacted by the policy the same way, but it helps them feel a bit more engaged because you have this opportunity to tie it into COVID. Okay, yes, everyone is upset about being in their home, but this is the reason why. And it kind of, again, helps break down the just stranger, interpersonal, abstract social media connection and make it much more human by showing, no, this is really how it impacts me. I need your help in making sure others are aware as well. Instagram, it's still not quite the channel as Twitter and Facebook for advocacy, but it's really coming into its own in this creative mindset. So we all know Instagram is already, you have a great photo, you need something compelling to share if you want it to gain traction, if you want it to look like a brand that others can kind of jump on the bandwagon for. So it's a bit more difficult to advocate in the same way. You're not really tagging, you're not really getting in front of legislators. However, it is a fantastic way to, if you are a creative, Instagram may be the best bet. It's this creating a brand and creating this community through super compelling, through digital, through video, that regularly updates supporters in a way that engages them much more than Facebook or Twitter would, and gives you an opportunity to kind of catch some of these who may only be on Instagram, and kind of just give them the opportunity to learn a bit more, and maybe they'll then want to go on Twitter and connect with the larger community. So while it's not quite advocacy in the same way, you're still creating that, raising awareness, creating education, building a base around key issues, key causes, in a broader way of bleeding disorders, that helps bring in others into your network. And then there are also obviously better ways to kind of build this persona. You can regulate updates through stories, through, and then the general campaigns on posts. So there are just a lot of creative ways that Instagram, I think, is coming into its own. Again, hashtags, bit more beneficial than Facebook. Again, coalesces people, gets you into other networks, into other areas that you might not otherwise be in. And Instagram, more so than Facebook or Twitter, it gives you an opportunity to throw in a ton of hashtags. It doesn't really detract from the brand, from the persona, if you do it in a way that is clean and doesn't kind of convolute your messaging. And so, as again, Kimberly said, as we, especially I know the future leaders on this call, as you guys all know, your stories is truly what matters. We can keep talking about this larger community around bleeding disorders, but again, the only way we can get this larger community in an engaging way is for each of you to share your personal stories, for each of you to share and create an ongoing dialogue with your legislator, their staff, why this specific policy will have a direct impact on you. You can help explain challenges of an entire community, but only through your personal story, and no other way can you do that. And so it really, especially as we transition away from in-person, and I think there's a fantastic opportunity, like Lynn said earlier, that although nothing quite beats in-person legislative days, advocacy days, the fact that we are now transitioning to virtual, and hopefully if we ever do go back to the new normal or the normal, that when we can have in-person, that virtual should always kind of be a key component. Not only is it just for ongoing efforts, a fantastic way to amplify voices all of the time, but for days like tomorrow where maybe some people in Northern California or some people in Southern California can't make it to Sacramento, but you can still advocate timely. You can still comment and push HCC Legislative Day hashtags and content to the top, especially within the Sacramento trending circle, to make sure that electeds are aware that although I'm meeting with 6 people, I'm getting mentioned from 45. This must be a big issue. I'm going to pay attention to it. And so by sharing your story in this digestible, compelling manner, not only then do you gather voices around this issue, do you coalesce support, but then you can mobilize. You can have everyone say on tomorrow during the Ledge Day, we're all going to post at the same time, flood news feeds, make it so people can't look away from bleeding disorders, make it so they have to pay attention to our issues, to our causes. There's no better way to help legislators, help their staff understand the human impact of laws they create. If they didn't hear from you, they wouldn't know how a specific policy either made it impossible for you to get your medication or if it truly benefited you. There's nothing better than a thank you follow-up of, because of your support on this issue, my daughter gets the medication she needs and she can now do whatever she would like, rather than kind of waiting and all of the challenges that we all feel accessing the medicines that we need. And so just reminding you guys that although even in your in-person, or if you don't have meetings tomorrow, that reminding legislators of the very real consequences. It gets so easy to feel abstract. I'm going to point behind me because the Capitol is back there. It's so easy for them, especially with how many laws California is creating all of the time, to kind of forget the true impact of these, forget how it may be hurting their constituents. And the only way they can know is by your guys' personal stories shining a light and making a direct appeal to either shared experiences they feel or that hundreds of thousands of others feel every day. And so these are just the issues, again, that you guys will be talking about tomorrow. I know Lynn will dive much deeper than I will. But I put these up knowing that it's timely during advocacy days. It's timely to talk about these issues. But the only way to truly be effective long-term is to continue advocating on either these issues or other issues that Hemophilia Council shares with you guys, to truly ensure that legislators, not just tomorrow, not just during March for Bleeding Swords Awareness Month, but throughout the year, are aware and have it in the back of their mind when they see a specific law or bill come through that, hey, the bleeding disorder community, like this kind of adversely impacts them. I wonder how the advocate, I wonder what so-and-so may think. Let's schedule a meeting with her. That's what we want. That's where we want this movement to grow from, to where we're providing them resources, we're providing them education on how these laws impact you, rather than an abstract, this sounds like a good idea, but it's not. So let's give them the information they need to ensure that they're making laws and legislation that truly benefit the bleeding disorders community, and keep you in mind when they're looking at other bills that may not be directly impacted as well.
We can take a couple quick questions, and then we are going to, Terry and I are going to go over the issues and the logistics for tomorrow. So anyone have a quick question for Caitlin in regards to social media?
So this is Randy Curtis, and I was not a Twitter user until I went to a conference in Europe a couple years ago, and they showed us how to use Twitter for advocacy, actually mostly in third world countries, but the message was the same. If you have an issue, a call to action, if you will, and you have a bunch of people sending Twitter or tweets to the legislator, the legislator typically doesn't read all those. They have somebody that manages that and that screens those tweets. And if there's a particularly well-written one, that one actually sometimes goes to the legislator. And what they say is that they are able to actually get hold of some of these ministers of health, because one particular tweet was written very well and it was very compelling. And then that way it gave, the Twitter actually gave the community access to people in power way higher than they normally would get, because there would be a group of people talking about the same thing, and the Twitter manager would peel that one out and forward that to the member. Have you heard of that kind of thing going on?
Yeah, so similar to what I said earlier of the more that a hashtag is used, the more that's flooded, there is that opportunity to kind of get in front of the legislator, in front of the policymaker, Minister of Health, whomever it may be, in a way that a phone call never would, an email never would. Some have social media managers, and even some elected, they'll have ledge aides do Facebook, Instagram, but a lot of them keep Twitter to themselves. They use it personally as well as politically. So there's a really good opportunity, unlike other channels, that even if they have a ledge aide reviewing them, they will come in the morning and ask them how many mentions or what people are worried about today. And if they all of a sudden see that there's 45 tweets within the past 10 minutes, all using the same hashtag, all asking for the same thing, it's definitely going to get their attention first thing in the morning or at that specific point. And that's exactly what this is for. We want them to pay attention, even if it's one tweet out of thousands. That's a success, because that means that you guys cut through the noise and you guys got your message in front of them, which is what this is all about.
We have about 5 minutes remaining. So I just want to open it back up for questions. I think that there was one that had popped in. Is there data that shows a link between social media trends and voting habits? I'm assuming
that's
they
a great
mean
question.
Maybe legislative voting habits is like, I'm guessing what they're referring to.
Yeah, so if that's the case, I don't know if there's specific data related to California, unless it's probably some research or thesis papers from Sac State. But I do know that in an abstract manner, Pew Research Center has incredible data points that truly show the link between either like social media get out the vote trends and large increases in voter registration, specifically among younger populations. I think we all saw that in the midterms, where the younger population, which normally doesn't quite vote as great, like dramatically increased their voter percentages. I don't have specific data on whether a social media trend impacted a specific legislator to vote yes or no, but I'm sure through indirect ways we can pull that kind of information.
And I can tell you that legislators, when I first started in this business way back when fax machines weren't even around, that it's evolved. And that, as Caitlin and Lynn and Alan mentioned, they do use social media, and they are on Twitter, as Caitlin referenced. So I tend to use Facebook and Instagram, but I'm back on Twitter and I'm starting to tweet, and I tweeted about future leaders. And I think that the legislators will see that. So the more we get our youth and our future Hemophilia Council ambassadors to help with that going forward, I think it's going to be a really wonderful tool, because the legislators really are on Twitter. And they're going to learn more about the council as we become more active in this arena. So it's really important. And this year, again, even saying thank you. Legislators all the time are bombarded by negativity. And so when you can send something positive and saying thank you for protecting the CCS program, or thank you for protecting GHPP, that goes a long way, and they will remember you.
And I would add too that another way that I think a lot of people kind of forget is following your legislator, definitely follow the Hemophilia Council of California on all social channels, but following your legislators gives you that extra little boost to where if they see a follow and then he's kind of like inundated with also bleeding disorder content, they start to connect the dots.
Right.
And it's also a way for you to be informed as well. I mean, it's been a good 10 years ago or so now, but there were times where when I was working for a lobbying firm, and they would be having late night sessions and negotiations, and I would go home at 6 o'clock or whatever, and I could come back in the office in the morning and read my Twitter thread and know exactly what had happened during the all night session without having to stay up all night and watch it. It's a matter of, you cultivate your Twitter stream of who you want to follow, and you can stay informed that way. So it can be totally a way of also being, you can cultivate that in order to stay informed about issues that you care about, as well as using it to influence those decision makers about things that you want them to change or do. I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thanks, Caitlin, so much for presenting earlier today, as well as this evening, and for Terry's assistance today. We hope that this was helpful as you prepare for tomorrow's meetings. We hope that those of you who were not able to participate in the meetings will join us in advocating on your social media channels or via email tomorrow. And if you have any questions whatsoever that we didn't get to, my email is at the bottom of the screen. It's lkinst, KINST, @hemophiliaca.org. Please feel free to reach out to me, and we'll be happy to direct you in the right direction. So thank you so much, and talk to you soon.